Auto-aim is one of the most controversial mechanics in all of gaming. While some people love auto-aim as a means to level the playing field and give players with bad aim a fighting chance, others say that it's a terrible skillless mechanic that's ruining competitive games. Then, there's the more nuanced opinion that auto-aim abilities like turrets are fair, but auto-aim weapons aren't. All of these opinions are more or less justified depending on how developers balance their games. There are many ways to make auto-aim a balanced mechanic, but not everyone succeeds at doing this. Even when it is objectively balanced, it's hard to shake the feeling that you're getting cheated when someone kills you with auto-aim. This topic has been brought to the forefront in the Deadlock community with the addition of Graves, a hero who has a full auto-aim weapon and minions that do the fighting for her. Graves is considered to be a brain-dead hero by many people, and even those who play her will admit that she's not exactly a difficult hero to play. This begs the question, is she a good character design? Is she balanced? And does auto-aim have a place in this game? In this video, I want to answer these questions by analyzing the different ways that auto-aim is implemented in competitive multiplayer games. We'll be taking a look at why game devs add auto-aim in the first place, some examples of bad auto-aim, what guardrails can be put in place to make auto-aim balanced, and whether Graves' auto-aim actually makes sense. So, why do game devs add auto-aim to their games? The first reason is very simple: to create a consistent and easy character that's perfect for players that have low mechanical skill or poor hardware conditions. It's a fail-safe for when players have an awful frame rate, terrible ping, or a less than ideal aiming setup. It also gives extremely new players a set of training wheels to help learn other game mechanics without needing precise aim. These are legitimate problems that game devs need to solve, and auto-aim is one of their most popular solutions. It's an adaptable solution that can be implemented in a bunch of different ways, and it can also be molded to fit the theme of whatever art style your game uses. Whether it's homing missiles, buzzing alien stingers, a shocking Tesla coil, or a mysterious ethereal beam, there are many ways to make auto-aim stand out as a fun-looking weapon. However, auto-aim isn't actually the only solution to this problem. There are a whole host of other mechanics that devs can use that don't stoop to the level of auto-locking to the enemies. Flamethrowers are a great noob-friendly weapon that are also extremely reliable on weak systems. They actually share a lot in common with auto-aim when it comes to their balancing, but they lack the same icky connotation as auto-aim because you still have to be looking in the general direction of the enemies. However, they are also AoE weapons, which doesn't make sense for some characters to have. The other option is to give players a fast-firing hit-scan weapon like an automatic rifle or a laser gun. These aren't as good as the previous two solutions when it comes to poor hardware conditions, but they're still really easy weapons to use that provide a fair experience for everyone involved. In many cases, they're easier to balance too. You can fine-tailor the weapon's damage and fall-off to ensure that it's not too strong. So why choose auto-aim over these other options? Well, I believe this is because in the eyes of the developers, it is by far the most effective solution to the problem. It's easier to use than hit-scan weapons and more thematically consistent than flamethrowers for most characters. It certainly comes with some downsides, but it does make a lot of sense. However, balancing auto-aim isn't easy, and many developers do it wrong. I think the best example comes from Paladins, a game that always struggled to balance auto-aim. Now of course, Paladins isn't exactly alive anymore, but that makes it perfect for this video as an example of what not to do. Paladins added two champions during the beta that had egregious auto-aim abilities. Lex had an ability that blasted an enemy with unavoidable shots, and Leon had two abilities on very low cooldowns that sprayed everyone on her screen with bullets. Both of these characters ended up being some of the most despised champions in the game, and they were balancing nightmares for the devs. Many players, including myself, cried about these champions being blatantly unfair and horrendously unfun to play against. But what makes these abilities so much worse than most other auto-aim abilities out there? Well, these abilities come with absolutely no cost or downside to the player. They can be used at any range, and while they do come with damage drop-off, they still do a bunch of free damage from a distance while also applying anti-heal. They also don't consume ammo, so you can use them even while reloading. And even though they come with cooldowns, they're absurdly low if your build isn't totally trash. Even though auto-aim is meant to be consistent, this is too consistent. Auto-aim still needs some limitations on it, or else it will feel overwhelming and blatantly unfair. So of course, in classic high-res fashion, when they added another auto-aim character years later, they learned absolutely nothing from their mistakes and made something even worse. Kasumi was a character released in 2022 that, more than any other character in the game, was an abject and total failure. She released with an auto-aim primary fire that had considerable range and heavy burst damage. To say there was outrage around this character's release would be an understatement, and this outrage sent her into an endless rebalancing nightmare that she would never recover from. She got nerfed into the ground and turned into a dead character almost immediately after release. The reasons why her weapon was such a terrible design are multifaceted. Despite supposedly being a short-ranged weapon, it actually had longer range than many actual short-ranged hit-scan weapons, and it had no fall-off. This led to her being more effective than other characters at medium range without needing to put in any effort. Her weapon was also extremely bursty. It featured a damage ramping mechanic that made her first few shots do very little damage, but this could be mitigated with the right build to the point that her second shot would hit for full damage. And she had an auto-aim burst ability that could deal huge damage in an instant if she had max stacks on an enemy. This all felt utterly horrible to play against. Imagine being bursted in 1 second flat at medium range by someone who didn't even need to aim at you. This was the reality for the first few weeks after Kasumi's release. Kasumi is a perfect example of how to do everything wrong with auto-aim, and she should be studied as a rubric for what not to do. Now, with examples like these, it might seem like auto-aim is impossible to balance. It's simply an unfair mechanic that shouldn't ever be in games. But that isn't exactly true. There is a case to be made that auto-aim can actually be balanced. And furthermore, devs have found ways to inject skill expression into auto-aim. You see, the answer has actually been lying in front of us the entire time in the form of the humble turret. Turrets are a fascinating ability to study in competitive games because, when done right, they can be a surprisingly engaging mechanic to play around. Turrets are stationary objects that automatically fire bullets at enemies with perfect accuracy. They can't move or chase enemies, which makes them hard to use aggressively. This also means that they can't run away from the enemies, so they usually die fairly quickly when left out in a bad position. Turrets usually need to be supported and protected with various healing and defensive abilities as a result. All of these different factors make turrets a mechanic that shifts the required player skill from aiming to positioning. Turrets do all the aiming for you, but if you put them in a bad position, they won't be able to damage the enemies effectively or they'll die before doing anything at all. Because turrets require support and protection to keep going, you need to play around them and position yourself smartly to help your turrets without getting killed. And if you're good at placing your turrets in crafty positions, the enemies need to figure out smarter ways to approach and destroy them. Because of these restrictions, turrets are allowed to do high damage at longer ranges, just like some of the bad examples I mentioned earlier. They avoid feeling like cheap free damage because they can't be used all willy-nilly, but instead are limited to being tools for area denial. They are primarily defensive abilities and can't be used offensively without some seriously clever placements from the person using them. This is ultimately what makes turrets feel so much more fair to play against than most other forms of auto-aim. So, with all this in mind, let's direct our focus back to Graves, one of the latest heroes in Deadlock. Has Valve used good game design principles to balance her in a way that's fair and fun, or is she another terrible auto-aim character who should be reworked or relegated to the dustbin of history? Well, I think that in many ways, Valve has actually done a good job balancing this character. Now before you go clicking off the video, just hear me out. Graves is a character with 3 abilities that could be considered auto-aim to varying degrees. Her primary fire is the most egregious example, being a beam that locks onto the nearest target. Her first ability summons raging spirits that viciously assault the closest enemy, and her ultimate raises ghouls from the dead that home in on enemy players and explode, dealing a bunch of damage. All of these, however, have many limitations to keep them in check. Her beam weapon has the shortest range out of any weapon in the game, and it also does very low damage per second. It does damage over time rather than burst damage, and it has a limited ammo pool that will drain even if you're not latched onto a target. Her weapon is extremely consistent in its effective range and it leeches stats from the enemies, but it can be countered by literally just standing over there. The main purpose of her weapon, besides dealing a little bit of extra damage, is to command her minions which target to attack and debuff them so her minions do more damage. It's not a damage powerhouse in its own right, and it has so many other restrictions attached that it's actually one of the weakest weapons in the game. You can still build around her weapon if you want, but it's completely different to any other gun build in the game because it requires you to leech from multiple targets with ricochet to do any meaningful damage. Instead of being a single target shredder, it's a group damage powerhouse, which is quite unique. This can be countered once again by just not standing too close to your teammates. No matter what, her weapon is incredibly limited by range and requires good positioning to make use out of. Her minions, on the other hand, both operate similar to turrets but with different parameters. Her deadheads are incredibly powerful and do a lot of damage, but they can only melee enemies within a very limited range. They can chase enemies over long distances if the enemies aren't paying attention, but they also die in one shot and can all be killed at once with a well-timed melee attack. Because these skulls are so squishy, they require both good positioning and timing to make use out of. If the enemies are focused on Graves, then they'll kill the minions almost as quickly as Graves spawns them in. The enemies need to be distracted by something else for the minions to start attacking consistently. They also need to be deployed directly near the enemies, otherwise they'll just float around aimlessly, not attacking anything. Graves' deadheads do all the hard work of aiming for you, but if you want to use them with any bit of effectiveness against enemies that aren't bots, you'll need to become quite clever with the positioning and timing of these troopers. This is how Valve injected a small bit of skill expression into her kit, instead of just making her a character that plays itself. The same is true for the ghouls that are summoned by her ultimate. This tombstone can spawn legions of minions that lumber towards the enemies and explode, but they are once again incredibly limited by range to make up for the fact that they can move. In isolation, enemies can easily deal with these minions, at which point they effectively become a damage sink that provides just a little extra pressure. However, during a fight, they are much harder to control, but enemies can stop them from spawning by targeting the tombstone itself. The tombstone is very fragile, requiring just 2 heavy melees to destroy. This is where, once again, positioning comes into effect. Graves needs to place the tombstone somewhere safe where the enemies will struggle to reach it, but not so far away that the minions are rendered ineffective. Or, Graves can get aggressive, placing it in a risky position and using it to bait heavy melees from the enemies so she can parry and kill them. Graves' ultimate definitely isn't perfect, and enemies that struggle to do sustained area damage will have a difficult time clearing out all of her ghouls. However, Valve clearly put a lot of thought into how it's balanced, and they made it so that the easy damage from her ultimate comes with a lot of drawbacks and counterplay. However, all of this careful and considerate balancing would be meaningless if Graves was an agile character that can easily put herself in the ideal position to use all her abilities. You see, the bow that ties her entire kit together is the fact that Graves is an incredibly slow character. Graves has just 2 slowly regenerating stamina bars and one of the worst base movement speed stats in the game. She has lethargic mobility, and she's quite squishy too when she's not leeching from the enemies. This makes it hard to chase enemies, run away, or otherwise reposition around the battlefield to deploy her abilities effectively. She can't be everywhere at once, which means she needs to consider her positioning carefully. This also makes her prone to being manipulated by the enemy team, as she is one of the most vulnerable characters to crowd control effects in the game. Her low health pool also helps keep her other abilities in check. Because the enemies spend so much time shooting her other minions, it would be unfair if she also had a lot of health to work with. She gets more survivability if the enemies make the mistake of being in close range with her for long enough, but otherwise she is a relatively defenseless character. In effect, Graves plays like a slow-moving turret that summons even more slow-moving turrets. Despite having so much auto-aim and easy damage, she's been balanced in a way that feels fair to play against with plenty of counterplay. Now, you can disagree with the entire premise of her character, and I wouldn't fault you for that. If you're against the concept of auto-aim based on principle, and you don't agree with my analysis that she's a different style of turret character, then you're absolutely entitled to that opinion, and I understand where you're coming from. However, it seems at this point in time that having an auto-aim character is an inevitability in most hero shooters because of the reasons I mentioned earlier. It's necessary to have a hero that can be consistent even under dire straits on terrible hardware for accessibility reasons, and it's important to have easy characters for new players to get into. Overwatch has auto-aim, Marvel Rivals has auto-aim, and so too now does Deadlock. If Deadlock is going to have an auto-aim hero, I think they've done a fantastic job with Graves to make her mechanics as fair to play against as possible. She doesn't have a modicum of aiming skill required, and yet she's still well balanced within the context of the game. She also doesn't feel out of place, as shooting minions and NPCs is already a big part of Deadlock's gameplay loop. Now, I don't think she's perfect, but I do think that Valve has taken the right approach with her and made very deliberate and rational choices with her gameplay design. I also find it very commendable that they're branching out and trying something that, to my knowledge, has never been done in a hero shooter before, adding a necromancer that summons minions to attack the enemies. And hey, they did it all without making her revive anybody. The last thing we need in this game is any more reviving in place. But anyways, that's gonna do it for this video. Let me know what you think about Graves and auto-aim in the comments down below. Do you agree with my analysis, or is there something that I've missed? And while you're down there, make sure to like this video if you enjoyed, and subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos from me. But with all that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all next time. Peace out.